Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today, Solidarity Fridays. This is Joe Moore, joined by Michelle Janikian and Kyle Buller today. How are you both doing?
Doing well, Joe. How are you, Michelle?
Yeah, good. Hanging in there.
Good. So yeah, another day in quarantine. Thankfully, things are warming up. You're in the middle of a rainy season, Michelle. Is that right? Monsoon land?
Not quite yet, actually, but we have been getting some cloudy and ugly days. But like around May 1st, it rains for like 4 months straight.
Oh my goodness.
It's coming.
Great. And so before we dig in, just wanted to let everybody know that we are launching some new dates for Navigating Psychedelics for clinicians and therapists starting on May 20. It's a live 8-week program. Some CE credits are available. You can learn more about that whole program over at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. So I think that's enough for now, unless there's more we want to mention. I think that's about it in terms of big things. Yeah. So, but I promise more interesting news coming soon. All right. So the first article we want to talk about is from Salon. I've had a thing for Dimitri Mujanis because he has this kind of great anarchist lens that he brings to this topic quite a bit. And, he put himself in great legal risk by doing the work he was doing previously when he, got in trouble and later was freed, treating people, hardcore heroin addicts and, people with real serious opiate problems in New York with Iboga. Amazing story. Everybody should check out the old episodes we did with them and learn more about Dimitri. And who is the other author here on the Salon piece?
Jonathan Dickinson.
Right. He runs a group in Tijuana. GTA, is that the name of the organization? But GITA, maybe. Global Ibogaine Treatment Association, maybe something like that.
Alliance.
Yep. Alliance, yeah. They're a really important group. And the two of them are quite influential. And I'm really thankful for this article because, we need to keep critiquing, our assumptions here. And we need to understand what we're doing better so that we can continue to do better and continually iterate improvements over time. And so I don't know, Michelle, what was your kind of primary takeaway from this Salon piece or any kind of things that stood out for you?
It was really interesting. It reminded me of a lot of the conversations you guys have been having on the podcast, especially the Will Hall episodes, and just how we really need to be more critical about, the idea of bringing psychedelics into psychiatry. Like, is this the right framework? I think that he had a really interesting point that was something that I started to ramble about on the show a few weeks ago, which was that this idea of a chemical imbalance model, it's been proven false. Like a well-educated psychiatrist no longer really believe in that. And yet this idea of psychedelic therapy kind of really plays into that, and we use this same framework to explain how psychedelic therapy will work in a way. And since that narrative no longer works, he kind of makes this point, they kind of make this point that now they're making this new narrative around psychedelics and how maybe it's like the antibiotic of psychiatry. It really just misses the point on how psychedelics work for healing. And I think both of the writers did such a great job in explaining that to a pretty mainstream audience. Salon isn't like a psychedelic publication, so I was really happy to see it there as well. I thought it made so many good points that I think we've been yelling about for a while now. So I was really kind of happy to see. I don't know. How did you feel about it, Kyle?
Yeah, a lot of emotion too, reading through it. And something came up as you were just speaking about the biochemical model of mental health. And, I just always kind of come back to, the influence that LSD had with the discovery of serotonin and LSD and kind of really creating a lot of advancements in neuroscience and psychopharmacology with creating a lot of those medications, and which, maybe played an important role also with that chemical model being okay, here's serotonin, here's LSD. LSD is psychomimetic, mimics psychosis. Maybe this is, what's modulating some of that. And yeah, so just wanted to comment on that. But coming back to the salon piece, yeah, I saw a lot of different critiques of this article on LinkedIn, on some different posts. And it was just really interesting to see how, I guess, some of the people were really viewing this. And they said, the authors, had this critique, but didn't really give any sort of like solution to what they're really arguing. And, I guess for people that know Dimitri, and this is something I was thinking about, I'm like, well, I guess if you know where Dimitri and Jonathan are coming from, like their solution is, you kind of have to maybe read between the lines here and have to be, I guess, like following, a lot of the research and the psychedelic community. But, and I think the one, main point here is just like, there's other ways of really providing this type of therapy, and how problematic, like, sticking it within this medical model could be, right? And really kind of honoring like a lot of the work that has come out of the underground. And so just their critique in general of like mental health diagnoses. And I know they had a lot of quotes in here just about like the DSM being, on a scale from like 1 to 10 or 0 to 10, like how much is the DSM science? And there's a doctor and they're just saying a 0, right? Just like, but, I also want to, acknowledge being a clinician and working with people. There are some people that do find having a diagnosis is helpful. It's almost like there's some people I've, worked with where it's like, oh, wow, just even understanding like these cluster of symptoms, like gives me some step towards a solution. It's like, oh, that's what's been wrong with me for all of these years. And so I know that language and having that can be helpful for some people, but, I think also it's important to critique it and challenge it at times too. I think if we want to, move the field of psychology and psychiatry forward, we have to critique it and also take into consideration a lot of the research that's been happening in, say, consciousness research, even though, we've challenged that term too. What does that even mean? So yeah, just challenging it and really, I guess, honoring some of these different approaches. And, the one thing that stuck out in this article too was that somebody actually talking about going through the MDMA treatment and being actually more traumatized. And, I actually talked to somebody that had a similar experience. And I don't know, maybe it's actually the same person. That was going through my mind. I was like, oh, is this the same person I chatted with? And they were just saying like, they needed to actually go into the underground to get treatment from the trauma that was induced by going through that clinical setting. And so, just some food for thought here. What are we doing? Why do we need to, constantly stick it in to that medical model? Could there be other approaches here? And, I think what we're chatting about here is really kind of setting us up for going into these other articles and topics that we'll be digging into a little bit later. And, thinking about this article with the salon and just thinking about the medicalization, this was a conversation that Joe and I have been having with our teacher, Lenny, as we were writing this ethics piece on psychedelics. And one point that Lenny kept bringing up, which I thought was interesting, I guess I really haven't thought about it until he started kind of talking about this, was that the only reason why we need to get this medicalized is because we made it illegal and we put it on a scheduling system. And so to make it official and legit and to deschedule it, to make it into a medicine, we have to go through FDA approval, right? To make that into a medicine, to go through all those steps. But what if it was never made illegal to begin with? And what if like we really honored these religious and spiritual frameworks and we didn't have to turn it into a quote unquote medicine? What if it was just like these really powerful substances that helped you kind of have some sort of self-discovery process here? And the one thing that this article also pointed out here was, the pollen effect. So people read in Michael Pollan's book and coming in with these huge expectations that they're going to like really heal from their depression, their anxiety, their trauma. Yes, that happens, right? There are these healing benefits. And obviously we wouldn't have a podcast to talk about psychedelics if we didn't believe in that. But yeah, just like the expectation that really kind of came out of, Michael Pollan's work here. And
It's interesting you bring up the expectation effect, or I mean, and the this pollen effect, because I've witnessed it. Like when I've worked at I've been to a couple mushroom retreats, and I've seen people like, they're there and they've done all this research and they're prepared. They did all their homework and they just don't have really big, expansive experiences, and they're really disappointed. And I think they can end up a little like more hurt than before, or they really feel bad about themselves because, the narrative is written that you have like one really big white light mystical experience. And like, but how does this narrative end? Like, and then you wake up the next day and you're a totally changed person that never feels bad again. Like, it just doesn't really make any sense. And I think that's what's missing is like, part of this work is just being like constantly like evaluating your behavior and your reactions and like living in alignment with those. And you learn a lot of lessons on psychedelics like mushrooms. But, and I hate to drive home the point of integration because I don't even know if I believe in like that it has to be like a certain way or anything. But I do really feel like if you're not reflecting and just being proactive in your own behavior, then you are going to fall right back into your old like slumps or rut or whatever you want to call it. And it's really hard to change the way you think. And psychedelics can help, but I really think that's like the missing part of the narrative is that we really need to like, and it's just not as fun and sexy, but really drive home that like, yes, you can experience just like, you can like really feel like a self-love and confidence and these things that you really never have access to in everyday life. And moving forward, that can help so much. But it's just so much more than the antibiotic of psychiatry. I really don't believe in the antibiotic of psychiatry. It's you really have to actively work on changing the way you think and behave and react and all these things. And it's a lot of hard work. Mushrooms make it more fun, but it's a lot of hard work.
Yeah. There's a couple paragraphs here that really stuck out. Just want to read them really quick because I think it falls into line with what you're saying here as well. So quoting here, the reality is that millions of people have done psychedelics for spiritual, therapeutic, or recreational purposes and have had healing experiences. Their anecdotal stories are what have inspired the current research, but only a tiny minority have done so under the care of a psychiatrist or conventional therapist. If psychedelics hold promise, maybe it's because they do not work in linear ways to provide overnight results. Psychedelic experiences can be expansive. They can lead people on paths of self-inquiry and growth that extend through space and time, bringing forward new challenges and insights that become personal reference points even years later. As Robert Whitaker points out, quote, that doesn't fit into a medical model that gets you FDA approval. You can't say we have these agents for exploring and coming to think differently about the world, end quote. The necessity of reductive research here is to come up with a strict clinical protocol that will lead to replicated changes for anyone with a given diagnosis. This rigidity belies the organic and expansive nature of the psychedelic experience. Quote, if they're going to be agents of exploration, asks Whitaker, why do you need a doctor for that? Why do you need to go to medical school for that? End quote. And then it goes on. There is a need for research into psychedelics as they present an opportunity to recontextualize how we think about and experience suffering. However, drowned in the media hype of psychedelic advocacy organizations and the mental health industry, there's little public discourse about the potential implications of moving psychedelics into a system with such a problematic history.
Mm-hmm. So thanks for that, Kyle. And the problematic history is enormous. So like you said earlier, this idea that the drug war, what if we never had that? And what would our relationship to these things be now if we didn't have that? It's a great question, right? So I urge people to study the origins of the drug war, how horrifyingly racist it is, how much harm it has done. Do no harm? Yeah, right. Like, let's do lots of harm to, a strategic minority. And that's coming more and more clear to me as I continue to study the drug war. And, we just had 2 hours with Carl Hart the other day, so I'm a little radicalized. But, people need to understand that. And then we should look at the history of psychiatry. Well, let's look at normal medicine first. So, like the horrifying Tuskegee experiments, actually infecting minorities and forced sterilization of minorities for research. And this is in the era of eugenics when there was all sorts of out of control stuff going on. We got to be aware of that. And, what did childbirth look like for a long time? Horrifying. If we look at the history of childbirth, they would like anesthetize women full on and, strap them all the way down. So this wasn't that long ago. And then we look at psychiatry, it kind of in a lot of ways arm of the state for a period of time. But, it's kind of a new profession. Like Freud was there really early. He was one of the first psychiatrists, really. There's a handful of them elsewhere, but, Freud was okay, but he didn't help people tremendously. He's a great theoretician, underrepresented. But, as drugs came in, the whole history of drugs, like that Richard Miller book, Drugged, I've read 3 times now. It's unbelievable. Like a history of drugs and like the manufacture of these chemicals and like finding out, oh, this thing we use for industrial purposes might have interesting properties on humans. Like, let's see if we can sell this or if it's helpful. And, fascinating. But there's also the dark side, political prisoners. Oh, you're crazy. We're going to lock you up in this psych ward. And, the doctor is going to be complicit and saying, yeah, you're a danger to yourself and others, but you're really just a political prisoner. And there's actually no harm other than political instability, I guess. So, and not to mention all sorts of like really crazy racist stuff that happened and harm that happened in the past. And if you're a psychiatrist, think about some psychiatrists that don't practice too skillfully. Like I know there's some wonderful psychiatrists out there, but I also know there's some real shitty psychiatrists out there. I guess one of the dirty secrets of medicine is, typically this is the last choice. Like people don't really want to go into psychiatry because the science isn't that firm, right? Like it's not respected the same way, heart surgery is or brain surgery is. Psychiatry is quite different. We don't have a firm agreement yet across psychological disciplines of what's the most valid, way of modeling the psyche. There's still vast disagreement there. So this is the struggle. Psychiatry wants to be respected in the same way. So they're kind of bending the narrative a bit to be respected that way. And perhaps this isn't everybody. This is just kind of the dominant narrative that I observe. Because this Salon article references humanistic psychology quite a bit. And in a way, I think that's Dimitri's suggestion is this has to be a little bit more humanist. Like, yes, we want behavior to change, but is psyche just behavior? I think absolutely not. And people need to be engaged in their process over time. It's not, oh, cool. Like 3 sessions of MDMA. Cool. Yeah, I'm legit. Let me go back and work at Raytheon, design some new missiles. Like, cool. But it's like, no, like that's not exactly how it should work, right? Like it should be a deep engagement with self and relationship and developmental processes. And there's a lot of complexity here. And, minimizing a child being defiant to, childhood, what is it? Defiant, some sort of defiancy disorder. Like, fuck that. No, like this is part of growing up in culture. Like I started reading the first few chapters of the book they referenced here, Saving Normal. And it's really helpful for understanding this critique. I'm not
even
saying,
like reading Whitaker's work is like really interesting as well.
Yeah. So there's just a lot here. And like, I'm not trying to say doctors, what I'm trying to say is you've got a lot of work to do. We want to be a partner in that. We're not trying to be the enemy, but please be open to critique and understand where we're coming from. And in the same way, a white male in America needs to understand American history and like imperialism and like kind of the crazy shit we've done. Medicine should also try to own that a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, why don't certain communities trust you? Why don't you get the results that the data says you should? There's a lot of things going on here, and let's understand it. Go ahead.
Yeah, Joe, and just like kind of bringing this up, this kind of comes back to a conversation we had the other day. When I was going through a lot of training for this alternative treatment, residential treatment place, we're getting exposed to a lot of these alternative ideas for psychiatry. And a lot of people thought it was like kind of anti-psychiatry, anti-medication. That definitely wasn't the case. But whenever, like, I guess, like, some people felt like they were pointing the finger at psychiatry. Like, my thing, it's like, we shouldn't point it at the doctors, right? It's the level of education and the institutions that are training.
They've inherited it.
And so we need to really kind of critique that, look at the institutions, look at like the education systems, and how do we change that, right? Because there's so many people that want to do good, right? You don't get in this profession because you want to do harm to people, but we also have to look at the education and the institutions that are promoting all of this, and how do we change that, right? How do we maybe envision what a new type of field would look like?
Right, revisioning psychiatry. Like, let's try to, like, I don't want to just say psychiatry, like medicine as a whole. We really need to figure out how to go forward. Like, it's so, just look at medicine in America versus medicine in other, in European countries. Like, horrifyingly expensive. I've dealt with this firsthand, and not necessarily great results. So, like, lower outcomes than other first world countries at much higher prices. And why is that? There's some sort of complicity apparently between hospitals and insurance companies, where they have some sort of non-compete action that just totally, like, makes it not so transparent to us. Yeah. So we've got a lot of work to do. I want, you doctors to be on our side, but I also don't want to have to get on my knees and beg, like, hey, can I please have acid? Hey, can I please have Ambien? Like, I can't sleep. Like, oh, can I have MDMA because I'm going to a concert? Like, I don't want to ask anybody permission. Like, it blows my mind that we need to do that. And, it's only because of the drug war that we're in this position, in my opinion. The FDA's role, like, this drug proving, well, how do I want to say it? The clinical trial, phase 1, 2, 3, that came about because of that thalidomide situation where people were, taking this birth control agent, and there was a lot of children being born with, like, pretty serious physical abnormalities because of the drug. So I'm down with that. Like, great, cool. Like, keep us safe with a safe supply, but be consistent. Don't force people to go shoot heroin in the alley that's, like, dirty and possibly tainted with fentanyl if they don't want it. And then, inject in unsanitary environments like an alleyway or a bathroom, right? We should be doing much better than we are. And this whole thing is just a messy ball of wax. I think we can get through.
Yeah, it's like, why aren't we throwing more funding at research to, try to actually help people and maybe create a new paradigm versus saying we can't research this because, they're illegal and, they might cause harm. It's like, well, let's throw research at it. Let's look at, like, how can we protect people, keep people safe, keep people happy?
That's a cheap research project. I bet you could get some really great data from some researchers in about 2 months' time. And you would have a really clean go forward, supervised injection sites, drug testing in all towns and cities, and, possibly a safe supply so we don't need to do testing. It'd be amazing. So this is getting rid of the drug scheduling system and, like, totally revisioning our world's relationship to substance.
I'd also like to add, I would love to see more, like, harm reduction based research. Like, why does all the research have to be in the medical clinical model, like proving psilocybin helps with this or MDMA cures that? Like, I want to know more about safety. I want to know, like, is it safe for teenagers to take LSD? Is it safe to mix these like cannabis and mushrooms? Is it going to raise my chance of having a heart attack, or things like actual keeping people safe things, and not just proving these things have value and maybe we can make a ton of money off of that value. In just my own opinion, there's just actually so little research in general about these things. There's some safety stuff, but it's always through the lens of, like, the drug war, essentially, and trying to prove that these aren't safe typically. Yeah. And then when they are proven safe, that data is just, like, hidden in a corner. And so, yeah, I think we're really lacking, especially if we're about to, like, mainstream these things. And there's still so much to learn about how it interacts with the human body. It kind of boggles my mind that we're really focusing on this very narrow clinical application of something that hundreds of thousands of people are probably taking every day around the world, and we don't even know that much about what it's doing. It's kind of scary and crazy to me.
Yeah, really is.
I think we should jump to the next one because this is going to take us a while. How do we want to introduce this? Michelle, maybe I'll let you introduce the topic here.
Okay, see if I can do this justice. Okay, I think we should start with, there was an article in Vice very recently by Shayla Love, who's like now my favorite psychedelic reporter, called "The Race to Patent Psychedelics is Just Getting Started." And this brought to light a lot of business deals that are going down, or basically more like patent applications, I'd be more correct in my language, that are in the works right now. And then this started this whole public conversation with Tim Ferriss and Christian Angermeyer. Is that how you say it?
Angermeyer is how I'm saying it.
And Dr. Bronner. And it's a lot to explain, but basically there's all these big corporations that have patented all this really kind of weird stuff that I found fascinating. Besides the compass pathways patent that we've talked about recently, patenting like, soft furniture and cool music or whatever for mushrooms, which is like obviously so ridiculous, and we can talk about that forever. But this article also went into some really interesting new patents like psilocybin, DMT, and LSD for weight loss, which actually I think could work in a type of like addiction framework, but that's like a whole other story. There's patents for DMT and 5-MAO DMT vape pens using like Philip Morris e-cigarette technology. There's a patent for a drug that will stop an LSD trip, which I have so many problems with, but also maybe another day. Patents for hair loss. There's so many. And I don't know if we want to talk about this a little bit more before we get into Dr. Bronner's response and kind of talking about what Compass Pathways specifically is doing in Oregon. But do you guys have any thoughts on this Vice piece?
I'll let you jump first, Kyle.
Yeah, we've been chatting about this stuff for a while, right, Joe? Just like the whole patent thing. And yeah, it's just interesting to watch it all unfold and kind of people racing to it. I was happy to see the comment there by Rick from MAPS saying, MAPS has recently engaged in patent attorneys to assist in strengthening our anti-patent strategy for uses of MDMA and to prepare easily accessible information for patent examiners, so patents will not be issued in the first place. And yeah, it's just always great to hear Rick talk about that and just what MAPS is doing, and some of the other companies like Usona that did like the open science, right? It's like, oh, Compass is creating this synthesis patent on psilocybin. Well, here we're going to release open science on our psilocybin synthesis and leave it open there. So, Joe and I definitely have chatted about the difference between like open source and sometimes the benefits of patents or maybe even trademarks. But yeah, I don't know. It's
well, let's lay out the benefits real quick before we. Just to be fair, because we are absolutely going to be shitting all over Compass in a minute. So like. So why are patents helpful right now? Like in a business sense, in a lot of areas, like it makes sense to have patents because you can get money to put these things through and to make these drugs available, via approved routes, like via FDA. Again, only a problem because of the drug war. And then MAPS has done a great job, but MAPS has been at it for like 25, 30 years or something. And they're still not yet prescribing MDMA outside of trials. So that's kind of a big deal. And Compass has been around for 5-6 years. I'm sure they've done a lot of asshole things. Like Catherine McLean has a lot of things to say about Compass. Mm-hmm. And because they kind of like were quite fraudulent with her in a lot of ways, and, shifted from being a nonprofit and went for profit in England. Like seemed really shady when that happened to me. And I was really upset about it. But so anyway, capital necessitates some sort of security. If you're going to make some sort of gamble with millions and millions of dollars, you want some sort of like promise that somebody can't just come in and snake this intellectual property. Yeah. And in the software world, like Linux is this great example of everybody pitches in, does the work, and then everybody benefits from it. And nobody charges for the software. Like you can charge for services and maybe there's some packages you charge for, but largely the OS is free. Android, huge beneficiary of that. The Apple phones, they run FreeBSD, which is like a similarly, free operating system. So we're all benefiting from free software all the time that all these hackers just kind of sit down and put together. And in a lot of ways, that's what has happened in the psychedelic space. Like all these hackers over the course of many thousands of years put all this shit together. Seems pretty great. And now these companies are coming in and say, oh, no. We're going to say that this is our novel invention. And it's not obvious is one of the terms they use in patent law, which is fucked up. Like that whole, I think what they were doing with that hand-holding patent filing was just testing the waters to see what the patent office would say. Thankfully, we have a view in there and we're getting loud. So patent clerks will go, maybe I should check out what everybody's saying about this patent. And they're going to find out pretty quickly what we're saying about the patent. Thank God. And, Michelle, you're right. You put out this book, but, all of us are leaning on a huge amount of history and a huge amount of experience out there from humans who have been doing this stuff for a long time.
It's that phrase, we're on the shoulders of giants.
Standing on the shoulders of giants. Probably Isaac Newton said that. Probably. I might be wrong though. Yeah. So we've got, reasons why patents are okay, right? I get a little freaked out about it. Like I used to be this kind of anarcho-pirate guy. Like people would be a lot better off if IP wasn't there. But there's also this balancing act of by having some sort of IP protection, people are willing to throw more money into inventing new things. And eventually it does become public domain, legally speaking. I think pharma has some weird loopholes where they can do some weird shit and keep it going longer. But books are what? Books are not, well, it's like almost 100 years, unfortunately. in that space, we've looked at doing audiobooks and public domain stuff, and it's like 90 years or something crazy like that. So, I don't know what to really say about that, but there is a benefit and we need to understand why that's there. But we also need to understand when companies come in and do some asshole things. Like this idea of an anti-competitive practice. Like we idealize this thing of, capitalism and free markets and all this, other stuff in this country. But when a company can come in and do anti-competitive stuff, should they be rewarded? Should they be punished? Their stock should at least go down a bit if they're doing some anti-competitive stuff, because we should get loud about it and people should know.
I think that's a really good segue into the next point, which is this blog that Dr. Bronner put on his website, which it basically calls out George Goldsmith, the CEO and co-founder of Compass, because apparently he's recently been reaching out to psychedelic researchers in Oregon, in the Oregon Health and Science University, in an attempt to, this is a quote from his article, an attempt to drum up concern and mobilize opposition to implementing 109 in Oregon. And, it looks like, this really looks like an attempt to just make Compass the monopoly. And Dr. Bronner tries to call him out. We can definitely go into the details of that. But basically, on Compass's website, on their Our Perspectives page, they have this emphasized quote in an article titled, "Should psilocybin be legalized?" And they say, to make sure it is safe and effective in patients, psilocybin therapy needs to be approved by medical regulators, not legislators, which is just their way of being like, until we find the best way, to do this and patent it and can make the most money off of it, what, no one should take mushrooms? It's ridiculous. Again, back to the point of, if the drug war never existed, none of this would be a problem, because anyone could just, exercise their right to liberty and pursuit of happiness and just pick some freaking mushrooms and eat them on a sunny day. But that is another. And not that 109 even legalizes mushrooms for personal consumption, but, it does kind of leave the door open a little wider than Compass wanted it to, in terms of allowing folks to, attend some kind of psilocybin assisted therapy for reasons outside of clinical diagnoses, which I think is really cool. You want to go to just like, you're not treatment resistant depression, but you're still having trouble in your life figuring stuff out. You could still go to Oregon and get this treatment, which I think is really cool. Not perfect, but a nice first step. And the fact that they're trying to even stop that.
Well, it kind of disrupts their plans, right?
Yeah,
I mean, they're hoping to probably have a monopoly, and now all of a sudden, because whenever people ask, like, oh, how do I get involved in this? How do I do this therapy? I'm always like, well, obviously, get education, get training. But, the way that it's looking like is that you're going to have to go through some of these company trainings, like, MAPS for MDMA. And then you're going to have to, and at least MAPS is doing it with a larger plan. I mean, every time we hear Rick talk, he wants like these spas, right? He's like, oh, just go to the corner spa and we'll be able to do psychedelics. But, it's like with Compass, it's like, to do psilocybin assisted psychotherapy, go through Compass and then use their protocol. I'm sure they're really hoping to just like dominate the market. And now that you have this new state initiative where it opens it up, and what is that going to look like? They're probably like, well, what if more states jump on this?
Yeah, they're probably terrified, which is great. If other states are listening, please jump on this. But, and they keep coming back to this language that they just want to help people, but it's just PR bollocks. Like I heard them say that at Horizons a year and a half ago when we were all there. I even went to this like women's dinner where his wife, the co-founder, was there, and they just kept saying the same language. Like they were clearly trained by a publicist to use this same exact language and to not deviate from the script, because this is how we achieve our goal. It's a classic move. And Dr. Bronner also goes into like what they're trying to do is also like what Compass, this like monopolistic and bullying behavior. It's also like a classic move in this space. If you want to be a monopoly, they're not doing something new and novel. So they can't patent it. But what they're doing in the psychedelic space and, with this history of the drug war and indigenous use and all this stuff that they're ignoring is not ethical. It's not right, in my opinion.
You're not wrong. And, I read Peter Thiel's book. Not too many people have read this, From Zero to One. It was an interesting book because it gives you an insight into his plays. He only wants to be investing in things that are effectively monopolies. And there's two ways to do it. Get your product exponentially better than what's available on the market, aka SSRIs in this context, or exponentially cheaper. So that is a way to create an effective monopoly, at least for a period of time. So he's in the mix here with Compass and Christian Angermeyer. And, they're going to use all the plays they can to make it look logical, when in fact, it's they're playing the game of sophistry, wordplay to trick people. And while I want them to get these things through the FDA so that insurance companies will pay for it, monopoly's fucked up, and we don't want there to be monopoly duopolies out there. We want there to be a huge amount of diversity so that there can be experimentation and improvement through diversity. Like if we have everybody doing, Walmart, like we don't have room for like farmers markets, and exploration there. Like we need a lot of people doing a lot of different things so we can understand what the best way forward is, because we don't actually really know that yet in terms of clinical stuff. And the religious stuff, that'll work itself out just fine. And this whole like patent situation is one reason why I'm really interested in this, religious project I'm working on, like getting priests and whoever else like ramped up to offer this stuff outside the context of medicalization. Yeah.
The last thing I want to say about this is a point I meant to bring up before is, so Dr. Bronner also says in this piece that Compass funded researchers which are they're like in an NDA, so no one has to say if they like are actually a Compass researcher apparently, and but that they're gonna like try to put a bunch of media out there that's anti Measure 109 in Oregon. So like there could be op-eds, and you won't be able to tell if this is actually like a PR ploy, because these people don't have to apparently admit to working with Compass, which is such like that actually doesn't make any sense to me, but. So I just want to warn our listeners, if you start seeing that stuff, be skeptical, dig deeper, because this could be actually just a public relations ploy to ruin what's happening in Oregon. We really don't want that to happen. So just always, read the news with a critical eye, I guess, is my piece of advice I want to put out there.
Michelle, there's a ton of researchers who are contracted with them, Compass, and like all of them had to sign this NDA where they can't disclose anything about the company or critique the company in public. Some very big names that we know are in that mix. Some of the top names in psychedelics can't say anything legally because they signed that contract, partly to get a supply of psilocybin for their research and partly to, probably get paid by Compass and play part in their research a bit.
And you almost can't blame them, because you need the drugs, and like everyone knows academics don't really get paid shit, so they probably need money.
Yeah.
Like they're working so hard. The little extra money must look so good. Like, oh, maybe me and my wife finally buy a house. I work 12 hours a day. Like I can totally see the temptation, and I am not above it, but it's Compass that's doing something wrong, really. And we just have to keep a critical eye on them, because this is kind of crazy. It's so unethical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a massive topic. Kyle, anything you want to add to this whole thing?
I just like how Bronner ends it. We're optimistic that Compass and Atai will not succeed in these efforts.
Right. Like there are very wealthy people on the opposition.
Yeah.
And this isn't just a business play for a lot of us. This is like, a real project of passion around, for a number of reasons, from justice to, helping a lot of people, to ending the drug war and much more. Yeah. And, stay on your toes. Like Michelle said, learn who these people are. When you're hearing somebody speak, go, I wonder if you've signed contracts with anybody. And that's why you can't critique anybody yet. Yeah. So it's an interesting development, interesting landscape, scary for sure. But I think we're going to win. I don't really think they're going to be able to succeed in the way they want to, because the opposition, that they don't know how crazy loud we can get. And we got a lot of lawyers on our side now. We've got, politicians like the gentleman named Wiener from California. I forget, Scott. There was one that had a PR situation a while back named Wiener, but I can't.
Not the one from New York. Oh my God, Anthony Wiener, don't get me started.
The California Wiener. Yeah, Scott Wiener. So, it couldn't be better, like that situation. But anyway, they're out there. Like we have those people on our side. And, people are putting their neck on the line for this fight. And it's a multifaceted fight, right? This is not just about decrim. This is about restoring our rights as citizens of the world, regaining autonomy over our bodies, improving science. A lot of things going on here.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm just thinking about patents and just from like the Indigenous perspective. And Michelle, you highlighting that PR wording of we just want to help people. And it's like, well, we just want to help people if you fit inside our paradigm, instead of actually thinking about new systems and actually new ways to help people. And it's like, do you really want to help people, or are you just really trying to make a lot of money off of it? And you're seeing this as a really great way to do so. Because it's like, yeah, if you really want to help people, again, coming back to like, I guess, psychedelics and creativity, like what are new systems that we can build? We need creative solutions, and continuing to follow the same old paradigm, we're not going to move forward. And that's going to be painful, right? Because it really disrupts maybe the way we live, the way we view things. I don't know what psychedelics and other work with, holotropic states have taught me is that we need a new way, and it's like if we just continue to do the same thing, we're just perpetuating the same old problems. And, I think this is where the psychedelic and, that disruptor comes into play, where it's like we need creative people to create new solutions, not continuing this just like bullshit cycle over and over again. And how can we get loud? How can we say, we actually don't want that? We want to create a new system here. Let's envision this new way forward. I don't know what that looks like, but I think we need to do a lot of visioning for that.
I think we need, when we all get vaccinated, to go on a retreat and envision it together. No, I don't know, but it's so
Very nice.
True. All right. Do we want to move on to more of the response in this argument with the Tim Ferriss and Christian?
Yeah, sure.
So basically, Tim Ferriss and Christian Mayer, sorry, Christian, got into this big Twitter fight kind of over this very similar patent problem. And so Tim posted a blog post, some thoughts on for-profit psychedelic startups and companies, and where he basically calls out Compass and Natai on some of these, on this confidentiality clause thing we were just talking about, and some other topics. And Christian responds, Tim, I'm a huge fan of your work, but on this topic, you are incredibly misguided. And he goes on to explain that, Tim Ferriss has only donated like $20 million, which is nothing. And that he thinks they need $650 billion to bring, psychedelics to the medical market. And if these companies succeed, back to this PR language, hundreds of millions of people who are currently suffering stand to benefit. And because the drugs will likely be approved as medical drugs, there is significant probability that insurance will cover it. We have just kind of talked about this. So Shayla Love, again, the reporter from Vice, did more digging on this. And she found these private emails that Anger Mayer sent to his investors that basically contradicts that statement about people wanting to help people. He says in this email, that was leaked, that I also expect a starting differentiation between solid players in the psychedelic space. To be honest, I really just see Atai and Compass and copycats. Most of these copycats miss one important thing: patents. Many psychedelic companies out there will never be able to bring a product to market as they will hit patents of Compass and Atai. It's an old business strategy that he's clearly using, to price everyone out of the market, to make himself the monopoly. And, it is basically the same argument that we've been talking about. But I think the Vice article brings up a good point toward the end. And this article is called "Investors Are Debating Who Should Own the Future of Psychedelics," if people want to go look it up on Vice. But it has this point at the end where it says, this continuing dialogue around patents seems to be more so about what IP is ultimately for. Is it meant to fund the work or to prevent others from doing the same and make a profit at the expense of access? Public conversations like these, as well as the granting and consequences of patents in the future, will help to hone in on the answer. Basically, kind of just sums up what we have just been saying. But it is really interesting, seeing the difference between people's public and private opinions about this stuff. You really can't trust what anyone says publicly, is really my takeaway. And I don't know if you guys have any more thoughts. We don't have to get into this drama too much, but it has been all over the internet this past 2 weeks.
Well, it's misleading, right? It's like, for a purpose, it's misleading. The fact that it's only correct in that we need to push it through this weird medical model that might be a little oversensitive. And drug companies regularly overstate how expensive it is to do drug development, because in their cost, they include all of the possible like opportunity cost lost of using that money spent on research. Like, oh, I could have built, 15 hotels in Dubai and made way more money. So they include that in the cost. So it's always inflated and misleading. So we've got to kind of deflate those arguments because they say it all the time, and it's essentially they're lying.
Yeah.
And what do mushrooms cost? Like Paul Stamets says, at scale, $1 a pound. Which would be lovely, right? But I think they're adequately cheap already. Like I'm totally fine with pricing these days, though I wish I was able to grow them because I love doing that in the past. But like what are these guys really trying to do? And it is monopolistic because they see, oh, if I can monopolize this, we could be the first $1 trillion pharma company or something crazy like that, or get bought up by Pfizer or J&J for gazillions. And, we made a killing in 4 or 5 years. Cool. Like these pharma plays are complicated, right? Like all these startups that are coming in, those are the real gambles, right? Like Compass is kind of like a sure bet in some ways if you're like a normal finance person. But some of these companies coming up with new molecules and trying to do their own thing, like that, there's not necessarily a guarantee that they're going to get through the FDA and be able to make a return on the investment people threw in there. So it's a weird situation.
Well, and just the idea of like, you just kind of mentioned new drug development. And I think this is like where it gets weird, right? Where it's like, maybe patents for new drugs, okay, for a little bit. But like, we're talking about plant medicine. So we're talking about like psilocybin, right? And it's like, we can grow them, and they're just like trying to come up with like new patents for it. And it's like, just thinking about like all the indigenous IP, right? And I know there was I don't know where I was reading it on, maybe it was that this research article that you posted, Michelle. But yeah, just even talking about like how much of this knowledge came from, these people. And now we're just extracting it and saying like, oh, we own it now and we understand it and we're going to make, millions of dollars off of it. Again, it's like we're standing on the shoulders of giants, like the people that came before us. And I always come back to this like quote from one of these Chacruna articles about Maria Sabina of like, ultimately she grew up in poverty and died in poverty, and how many people are benefiting from her providing the psilocybin ceremony to Gordon Watson, right? And him coming back and speaking about it. And now we're kind of all riding on those tails. And, Michelle, like what does the mushroom scene down there look like? Is there money coming to that area to say, hey, thank you for sharing all this with us? No, right?
No. And that's so, yeah, I sent you guys this article. It's actually, it's more of a academic piece called Ethical Concerns About Psilocybin Intellectual Property. And it was co-written by my source in the Mazatec community, Inti Garcia Flores, along with a bunch of researchers like Ishmael Ali and Natalia Ginsburg and other researchers like Konstantin Gerber. But basically, it's such an interesting article. I really recommend anyone to read it because, it's taking an indigenous perspective to this patent grab. And it's like, what the heck is going on? So I'll read a little bit here. From an indigenous perspective, psilocybin research and drug development tells the story of extraction, cultural appropriation, bioprospecting, and colonization. Since Gordon Watson's article and since he revealed Maria Sabina's identity without her permission too, which is like just number one ugly colonizing thing, like just to start this whole mess. But basically, this is against Indigenous people's civil rights, according to some like UNESCO conventions for safeguarding of the intangible cultural heritage of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. It reads that the right to maintain, protect, and develop the past, present, and future manifestations of their cultures, any Indigenous culture, such as archaeological and historical sites, artifacts, designs, ceremonies, technologies, etc., determining that states shall provide redress through effective mechanisms, which may include restitution, developed in conjunction with Indigenous peoples with respect to their culture, intellectual, religious, and spiritual property taken without their free, prior, and informed consent or in violation of their laws, traditions, and customs. So this argument basically says, like, you can't patent something that Indigenous communities have been using and being persecuted for centuries. Without at least, involving them in the conversation and providing some kind of restitution. Because, if they're not going to be able to benefit at all, if people in Huautla are still living with dirt floors and terrible water quality and all this horrible stuff that they're not, and living at the same standards of quality of life that we are whatsoever, and we're going to make millions of dollars off of their ceremonial use of this substance. It's really quite ugly and sad. And, the article also goes into talking about how, we're using psilocybin for depression, but, quality of life affects depression. And these people are living in a quality of life, standards that are just not up to how we view, how we should be living. And if we can't help raise their quality of life first, it really doesn't make a lot of sense at all. And it should be legally bound. And this paper argues that maybe it is, and maybe there's cases for lawsuits or something, but who has the money for that? Definitely not people, in Indigenous communities. So there's one more. This just brings up the same point, but it says in the case of psilocybin, for which there are now at least 24 registered patent processes, no pharmaceutical psilocybin developers have reached any legitimate or reciprocal agreements with the Mazatecs or any other Indigenous communities. And not to call out Paul Stamets, but he is on that list. And then I would love to see him as a humanistic mushroom guy maybe start that initiative. Other people could follow. But, Yale is on that. The U.S. Veterans, Department of Veterans Affairs was on that list. So there's a lot of big government, big influencers besides just investment firms on that list that could set the example. Yeah, I don't know if you guys will have anything else to say about this. I could just read the whole article.
So, Michelle, this document, this person on Twitter was hitting me up about it. It's Article 31 on the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People is where that came from. United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which is only from 2007. It's pretty recent. But Kyle, go ahead.
I don't know if this is on topic, but, some of these things just started popping in my head as you were speaking, Michelle, and just thinking about Indigenous lineage and medicine holders and their folklore and knowing a little bit more about the medicine. And something that always pops into my head, if we want to get transpersonally weird here, I guess, when I was talking to somebody, I think it was Dr. Daniela Pelusa, she was talking about the tribe that she really spent time with. They didn't always drink ayahuasca all the time. They would only go into that space when they really needed something. I asked, well, why is that? And they said, well, when you go into that space, some of that energy comes back out into your community. And could the community contain, some of that stuff that could come out? So maybe the spirits that came out. And it's and this is my point about some of the spiritual emergence stuff. The more that we kind of get into is, are we listening to some of these Indigenous elders sharing about their medicine experiences, sharing about those realms? And, just in terms of commodifying medicine, this popped in my head as you're speaking, Michelle. And this comes from Louis Mel Madrona in his book, Narrative Medicine. It's not necessarily about psychedelics, but just talking about, the potential harms of maybe not listening or understanding where these medicines come from. So the quote here is on September 25th, 2005, the Honolulu Advertiser reported a story from the Fiji Times about the herb kava kava. According to the story, people in Fiji were aghast that the University of Hawaii researchers had just figured out that the occasional liver toxicity caused by the herb was related to the inclusion of the stem and leaves in some commercial kava kava preparations. The articles from Fiji was quoted saying, Why didn't they just ask us? We've known for centuries not to use the stems and leaves, that they are the waste part of the plant. Everyone here knows that you should only use the root or you could get sick. And that was unquote from that person speaking. The Fiji Times writer went on to conclude that the American pharmaceutical and herb companies were probably just using the whole plant because they could make more money that way. The Fijian story about kava kava was better than the manufacturer's story. However, in modern scientific story of botanical medicine and profit making, the local indigenous knowledge of the people who lived with the plant was dismissed as unimportant, a disastrous consequence.
Racist. It's just this colonial attitude that, like, why listen to these savages or whatever, this horrible lesser than people? Because how could they possibly know with their limited education and understanding of how the world works in my Western worldview? It's sickening. I can't believe that happened. It's just like so obvious. Thank you for reading that, Kyle. I'm very upset over here.
Yeah, and I guess it just like kind of brings up the point when it comes to plant medicines and maybe like new patents or new products, like what are people doing? Are they really understanding where some of this stuff comes from? And it's like, oh, we'll just use the whole plant. It's like, what are you doing? You never do that, right? It's like these people have spent so much time with these plants, just passed down centuries. Knowledge passed down.
And we're even like, especially in the Mazatec community, like we're persecuted by the Spanish during colonization. I don't know if this is 100% true, but I read that the Mazatec or this like culture didn't always live in the mountains in Oaxaca, but they went there to be more isolated and so they wouldn't be as persecuted for their beliefs even before colonialization. That might have been like within like Mayan and Aztec like politics, actually. I have to do some more reading before I'm talking super publicly about this kind of stuff. But the article on the, Indigenous IP suggests the Mazatec community protocol. It says, a protocol could be developed in order to consent with the researchers on the biocultural heritage. The racialized and colonial Western mindset contributes to Westerners' ongoing delegitimization of Indigenous community-held knowledge. Westerners consciously or subconsciously racialize and demean the Mazatec as the noble savage, in quotes. Western scientists and researchers tell Mazatec, it's in Mazatec, but it means wisdom bearers, that they, in fact, are naming the mushrooms incorrectly and that they do not know the range of their local mushrooms.
That's what got me started with the kava thing. I read that.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that reminds me of the kava story.
But yeah, I mean, it's just causing so much more suffering in these communities that have gone through so much and are already struggling so hard, especially this bioprospecting idea. The article says it causes conflict and tensions, disconnection, poverty, and suffering in communities from which the knowledge and traditions originate. This suffering tracks onto our understanding of how one's social and cultural environment can affect mental health. In other words, non-consensual, extractive, for-profit ventures based on intellectual property regimes can cause intergenerational distress and suffering in impacted Indigenous communities in a way that could actively perpetuate mental illness while cutting them off from rightful benefits derived from their intangible cultural heritage. I thought that was actually quite beautiful. I wanted to read it real quick, but I agree. I hope more people just give this some thought as we move into this weird new world of psychedelic capitalism, which I'd love to plug really quick. We have a new writer who just wrote this really great thought piece on this. It will be out by Friday, so
awesome.
Check out our blog for Psychedelic Capitalism and Other Myths. Is the joke on us? It's really good. I really like this piece. It's by Simon Ugler's new writer for us. I'm really excited.
Awesome. I'm excited for it as well.
Yeah, it's a big deal. And I would encourage people, like, let's learn if reparations have been made on stuff like this in the past. I know Mark Plotkin is looking at this topic with Amazon Conservation Team. This is a big heritage issue that we're dealing with. Like, look at the rubber trade, the history of the rubber trade, horrifying. And there's a lot of implications for what we're dealing with now. And this might be one of the better ways to get reparations is for the United Nations to start making rulings in accordance with this Declaration of Rights of Indigenous people. And maybe it's not the ACLU, but maybe it's like Indigenous CLU. And like, how can we get funding together for legal teams to go at these groups and figure out ways? And let's not go into this right now, but how does MDMA and LSD fit into this? We need to figure that out. I don't have a clean answer for you, but we need to understand, like, is this where Western civilization, white people should be living, or should we figure out a way to co-collaborate more and give people resources for sharing this with us and to make up for the horrible history we've allowed them to, endure. Let's not even go into the murder down there. But yeah. All right. Murder. That's probably a good enough point to stop. So we're rolling a bit over an hour. Either of you have any kind of closing thoughts before we kind of wrap here? All right.
It's a big topic. And I know I always after these episodes, I always think and simmer about what we've talked about. I'm like, I wish I could go back and record some of these thoughts that I have because I didn't get to say everything. But yeah, it's a big topic and it's going to be interesting to see this unfold. There was just another article that came out about wealthy funders funding psychedelic research. And I saw that somebody retweeted one of our tweets about just like the money coming in and, talking about capitalism and all this stuff. It's like, how do we, I guess, view this, our relationship with money? Because, I hate that it's sometimes it feels so negative and it's anti-capitalism, anti-money. But it's if we were able to have a lot of money, be able to fund a lot of this research, do it ethically with integrity, to be able to give back to some of these people, that'd be wonderful, right? And so I think it's how do we really kind of change our relationship to money and not always think some of the capitalistic stuff's totally evil. It's how can we use that to the benefit for the greater good down the line? And not think about also creating monopolies so you could store all that money to maybe buy yachts and palaces and whatever else you're doing with it. Build some schools and help people.
Hospitals. Yeah, that could. Yeah. I mean, I know it's so tricky because we all need money and we need money for these things to become legal, whether it's through some kind of FDA approved medical model or even just decriminalization and regulation would cost so much. But if people are already applying for these patents, seeing what sticks, what will be the $1 billion investment, I just really hope that, there could be a plan for giving back somehow, or for also legalizing so we can just have also personal use and spiritual use and home growing and being able to provide our own medicine for ourselves. I mean, if there's anything the mushrooms love to teach me, or mushrooms in general, is to be self-reliant. Yeah. And so I just hope people just stay critical, keep an eye on this stuff. It's going to just keep getting crazier. So we need all your support through this crazy process because I think it's going to take a toll on all of us, honestly. So that's all I have to say, I think.
How about you, Joe? Any closing remarks?
Are we trading the DEA for patent courts?
The new enemy.
Yeah. If so, fuck that. Anyway, I think it's a great time to wrap up. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Michelle and Kyle. It's been super, super good, super in depth. We need to do more of this. And maybe somebody out there has great answers. I think violence isn't the answer, though some of you probably think it is. It's not, I don't think. Equal and opposite reactions, guys. So they'll come in with more guns than you can imagine. So don't do it. And I think that's it. So May 20, Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists starts up again. Amazing 8-week course, and would love for you to join us. So I think that's it for now. We'll see you all on Tuesday for the next episode. It's going to be a fun one. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Bye.